This past week, our youth spent the week serving the community through service projects. Every morning, they would gather to bless our larger community in some manner. One day, they made cookies for Community Lifeline, a shelter in Shelton. Another day, they prepared the Lacey St. Andrews Church to host the summer literacy program for students ages K through 5. After each morning service project, the kids got to participate in a fun activity. On Monday, the activity was going to the movies. It turns out the only remotely friendly youth group movie, right, because it's Barbie Hammer weekend, right? Between the two, the only youth group appropriate one was Barbie. If you want to hear more about the Barbie movie, I will give you a shameless plug for the Anti-Racist Film Club podcast that Lauren and I will be putting together in about a week. You can find out more in the Courier. We're going to have some fun talking about Barbie. But we're going to talk about Barbie this morning too because, it's Barbie Hammer weekend or whatever. The movie is centered around the premise that there is a place called Barbie Land, which is not the real world. Barbie Land is populated by Barbies and Kens. The Barbies and Kens in Barbie Land represent the various iterations that the dolls have taken over the years, and surprisingly, are not uniform in appearance. There are Barbies and Kens of various ethnicities, shapes, and hairstyles. There's a Barbie in a wheelchair, and the Barbies have an assortment of careers, from doctor to president of Barbie Land. The Kens just beach, but that is another story, and you'll have to see the movie or listen to the podcast to understand what it means to beach. In spite of the Barbies looking diverse and having diverse careers, there is a sameness still to them all. They are almost interchangeable. They all smile the same. They all talk with the same cookie-cutter cheerfulness. They all dress in a very similar style. Even in the diversity of their physical appearance, they all have the same kind of plasticky perfection. To be fair, the Kens in the movies are perhaps even more plasticky perfect than the Barbies. One of the main characters in the movie who is not a Barbie, is from the real world. And she points out that this plasticky perfection is not at all real and advocates for the creation of ordinary Barbie. Even in making the point that Barbie does not represent the real life experience of women, the real world character also makes the point that women are often treated like objects and not given the opportunity to show up as fully human, to be filled with contradictions, ambitions, disappointments, and a full range of emotion. The Bible largely does not treat women as if they are objects. While the biblical stories often tell the story of circumstances where women might have had few options and little agency, the women themselves are often depicted in manners that capture their full humanity. Think back to the story of Hagar and Ishmael that we read a few weeks ago. Hagar is tossed out like Abraham and Sarah as if she is an object that has lost its value and is no longer worthy of consideration. But that is not how God sees Hagar. And the Bible does not leave Hagar as an object, but gives her full voice and agency. 2 generations after Hagar, we find the story we read today, where women are treated as objects by the patriarchal system and the scheming men in the story. We cannot ignore the context of the time where it was common for marriages to be negotiated in the terms that Laban and Jacob discuss. So while we might not appreciate this sort of bride negotiation today, it was a normal aspect of the ancient Near East. Laban is asking for a bride price from Jacob, and since Jacob has no possessions, he has to work to pay that bride price before he can marry one of Laban's daughters, who he thinks will be Rachel. Of course, while he thinks he's working to marry Rachel, it turns out that Laban tricks Jacob into marrying Leah instead. The story doesn't tell us much about Leah and Rachel's participation in this arrangement. No one appears to ask for their consent to these marriages. This is not surprising given the practices of the time. Marriages were more about family alliances, property, financial stability, and women were often not consulted about their preference. But the story takes it a step farther, and Rachel and Leah are treated by their father as if they are almost interchangeable. Laban has a practical rationale for the bait and switch. It is not done in our country for the youngest sister to marry before the eldest. But this is not in direct reference to his daughter's feelings or her desires or even her consent. Laban clearly appears to be the bad guy in this story, the one who has tricked Jacob and perhaps also tricked his daughters. The story does not give as many details about their involvement, so we're not sure if they have any participation in the duplicity. But if we remember back just a couple of weeks when Pastor Alexa was preaching, we might remember that Jacob himself played a trick on someone in his family and tricked his father in a very similar manner in order to receive his brother Esau's birthright so that Jacob could be the primary inheritor from his father Isaac. Jacob's mother, Rebekah, who facilitated Jacob's deception, has in fact sent Jacob to Laban to find a wife, in part to protect Jacob from his brother Esau, who is out for revenge. We might say that Jacob had this coming. Plus, there is the detail that Jacob, after spending the marital night with Leah, does not realize until the morning that she's not actually Rachel. Either women are so interchangeable to Jacob that he cannot indeed tell one from another, or he participates in the deception as well, perhaps hoping, as it turns out to be, to get two wives out of the deal. I used to teach Disciple Bible Study, which is a year-long study of the Bible. Disciple Bible Study starts in Genesis and moves chronologically through the biblical story. This story of Jacob always comes early in the cycle of disciple, and about a month into reading the Bible, we stumble into this messy, messed up family. Every time I taught the class, we would come to this story and someone would say, "How can this be the foundational family of our faith? How can God bless Jacob in the story we read last week of Jacob's ladder, and then we'll see next week bless him again even after this mess? Why didn't God pick a new family, a better family, a more righteous family?" Perhaps you already know the answer to that question. Because all families are messy. There are no perfect families out there. And if they were perfect, they wouldn't really be human. I think we often want the characters in the Bible, the stories of our holy text, to be more like the perfection of Barbie Land. In the Barbie movie, when Barbie is still in Barbie Land, there's a little spoiler there. She leaves Barbie Land to go to the real world, but it happens early, so still go see the movie. So she says, while she's still in Barbie Land, "It is the best day ever. So was yesterday, and so is tomorrow, and every day from now until forever." Think of how we sanitize so many of the biblical stories. We turn Mary, Jesus' mother, into a meek, sweet, submissive woman instead of recognizing her bold prophetic voice and how she would have been considered a fallen woman in her times. I don't know if she would have fit into Barbie Land. Or how we sometimes ignore the ego and fiery temper of the Apostle Paul because he is one of the most important writers of our holy text. Part of the reason the Barbies in Barbie Land appear to be so plastic, besides the fact that they are dolls, is because everything in Barbie Land is perfect. Today, yesterday, tomorrow, and forever. Barbie believes she has solved all the problems of feminism, And every day is filled with fun and self-actualization. And life is completely good. She doesn't even have to leave Barbie land, though, before this vision starts falling apart. And when she gets to the real world, she discovers that life is complicated and messy. There is both beauty and heartbreak in the messiness of humanity. The story of Leah and Rachel, as well as their maids Zilpah and Bilhah, who are also given to Jacob when he marries Leah and Rachel, is heartbreaking in its treatment of women. The deception that began with Jacob and Esau continues to have consequences in Jacob's life, but those consequences are largely visited upon these 4 innocent women. Their children will continue to feel the burden of this family drama, as we will see in upcoming weeks. Most of us probably know that brokenness in one generation has an impact for generations to come. But the work of redemption, God's work in the midst of our sin and chaos, begins almost immediately in this story. If we read just a few more verses, we would read that God sees that Leah is unloved and so grants her children before Rachel. Rachel will eventually also have a son, Joseph, who will carry the burden of his mother and father, but will also bless generation after generation with his leadership and wisdom. The original call to Abraham, reiterated to Jacob, is that they are blessed to be a blessing. God can accomplish this work, the blessing of others, generation after generation, in spite of this family being a hot mess. God's redemptive work never excuses sin. It is not okay that Leah and Rachel and their handmaids Zilpah and Bilhah are treated as less than human, objects to be manipulated by the patriarchy. It matters that Jacob stole the birthright from his brother and set into motion this ongoing generational trauma. But the good news is that none of the human sin and messiness stops God from working. God will bless the world through the Abrahamic family in spite of, and perhaps even within, their mess. We are allowed to name the tensions in biblical stories, to argue with them and wrestle with these characters from whom we inherit God's promise. Last week, when we saw Jacob's receiving again God's blessing and call, we named that we are inheritors of God's promise to this Abrahamic family. We are promised God's presence with us, and we are called to receive God's blessings and be a blessing to others. What if God waited for our perfection? What if God waited for us to have the best day ever, tomorrow and forever? God would have given up on us a long time ago. But the promise God makes to Abraham, to Jacob, and to us is not that God will show up only when we're perfect. The promise God makes is that God will show up and bless us. In return, we are called to bless others. And it turns out we can do that even when we are a hot mess. Amen.